Home alone, but not alone. Being home alone should be a time for peace, for quiet, for catching up on all those things you put off when the house is bustling. But sometimes the silence is shattered, sometimes the peace is invaded, and sometimes being home alone becomes a terrifying fight for survival. Tonight we delve into 3 true stories of people who wished they had company. 3 tales of terror that unfolded within the supposed safety of their own homes. 3 reminders that the things that go bump in the night might just be closer than you think. Keep the lights on, hug your pillows tight, and prepare to be pulled into the darkness. These are their stories. 10-year-old Emily was home alone, her parents working late as usual, leaving her to fend for herself in the big, eerie house. The old Victorian house creaked and groaned around her, a familiar symphony that usually faded into the background, blending with the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. But tonight something felt different, an unsettling energy in the air. A chill snaked through the house, raising goosebumps on Emily's arms, making her shiver despite the warm summer night. She tried to shake off the feeling, turning on her favorite cartoon to drown out the silence, hoping the cheerful voices would bring her comfort. But then a soft thud echoed from upstairs, breaking through the cartoon's laughter. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. It sounded again, closer this time, like footsteps slowly descending the stairs, each step deliberate and heavy. Fear coiled in Emily's stomach, a tight knot that made it hard to breathe. She told herself it was just the house settling. An old house like this was bound to make noises, right? But the rationalization did little to quell the growing terror, the sense that something was very, very wrong. The footsteps stopped just outside the living room door, followed by the distinct sound of a door creaking open. Emily's breath hitched, her body tensing. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a place to hide, her mind racing with fear. She scrambled behind the sofa, her small body trembling. Silence enveloped the room. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity, the silence pressing down on her like a weight. Then a soft, raspy voice broke the quiet. "Emily," it whispered, sending a jolt of terror through her. Emily clamped her hand over her mouth, stifling a scream, her eyes wide with fear. The voice was close, too close, as if it were right next to her ear. It seemed to be coming from right behind the sofa, the air around her growing colder. Suddenly, the front door slammed open and her father's voice boomed through the house. "Emily, we're home!" The whispering ceased instantly, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Emily had never been so relieved to hear her father's voice, the sound bringing tears of relief to her eyes. She scrambled out from behind the sofa, tears streaming down her face, her legs shaky. Her parents rushed to her, their faces etched with concern, their arms wrapping around her in a protective embrace. "There was someone here," Emily sobbed. "Someone was calling my name." Her voice trembling with fear, her parents exchanged a worried look, their faces pale. They searched the house from top to bottom but found no sign of an intruder, no evidence of anyone else being there. The next day, Emily's parents installed a security system, determined to give their daughter peace of mind and ensure her safety, but Emily knew deep down that the unseen visitor had left an indelible mark on her soul, a scar that would never fully heal. She never felt truly alone in the house again, always sensing a presence lurking just beyond her sight, a shadow that never quite disappeared. Years later, long after she had moved out, Emily received a call from her childhood neighbor, the voice on the other end filled with unease. "They finally tore down your old house," the neighbor said, her voice hushed, as if afraid to speak too loudly. "They found a hidden room in the basement, a place no one knew existed, and Emily, they found something else. Children's toys, old and dusty, scattered across the floor as if waiting for someone to come back and play." Sarah was home alone, a raging thunderstorm pounding outside her isolated cabin. The wind howled through the trees and the rain lashed against the windows with a relentless fury. The power flickered, casting the room in an eerie, intermittent glow. Shadows danced on the walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She tried to ignore the storm, focusing on the book in her hands, but a sense of unease prickled at the edges of her mind. Every creak of the cabin seemed amplified, every gust of wind a potential threat. The phone on the side table rang, its shrill tone jarring in the silence. It was an old rotary phone, and its ring was loud and piercing. cutting through the ambient noise of the storm. Sarah hesitated, a strange reluctance holding her back. Her hand hovered over the receiver, her mind racing with possibilities. She wasn't expecting any calls, and the storm had likely knocked out most of the phone lines. The thought of who could be calling her at this hour sent a chill down her spine. Curiosity got the better of her. "Hello?" she answered tentatively, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Only the faint crackle of a bad connection met her ears. The static was almost hypnotic, drawing her deeper into a sense of foreboding. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Sarah repeated, her voice slightly raised. The silence on the other end was deafening, making her heart race even faster. A low, guttural chuckle sent shivers down her spine. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of darkness, echoing in her mind. It was a sound devoid of humor, filled with a chilling malice that seemed to seep through the phone line and wrap around her. The malevolence in that chuckle was palpable, almost tangible. Before Sarah could react, a voice, raspy and distorted, whispered, "We know you're alone." The line went dead, leaving her in a silence that was even more terrifying than the storm outside. Sarah stared at the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the blood rushing in her ears, her pulse quickening with each passing second. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. It was a primal fear, one that gripped her entire being and refused to let go. She tried to convince herself it was a prank, but the sheer malice in that voice resonated in her bones. The words echoed in her mind, refusing to be dismissed. Another clap of thunder shook the cabin, plunging it into darkness. The power had finally given out, leaving her in complete and utter blackness. Sarah fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911. The line was dead, no dial tone, no connection, just silence. Panic welled up inside her. She felt trapped, suffocated by the darkness and the oppressive silence. She was trapped alone, with only the storm and the memory of that chilling voice for company. The isolation was overwhelming, making her feel more vulnerable than ever. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from the front door. It was a sound that cut through the storm, demanding her attention. Sarah jumped, her breath catching in her throat. The sound was relentless, each bang more forceful than the last. The banging grew more insistent, accompanied by the sound of splintering wood. Whoever was out there was determined to get in. Someone or something was trying to get in. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Sarah stumbled back, her eyes frantically searching the darkened room for a weapon, an escape, anything. She needed to defend herself, to find a way out. The phone rang again, its shrill ring echoing through the cabin. It was a sound that seemed to mock her, reminding her of her helplessness. Sarah stared at it, her blood turning to ice. The ringing was incessant, each ring a reminder of the voice she had heard. Hesitantly, she picked it up. Her hand shook as she brought the receiver to her ear. "Leave me alone!" she screamed, her voice raw with terror. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. The voice on the other end chuckled again, a chillingly familiar sound. It was the same malevolent chuckle that had haunted her earlier. "We're already here," it whispered, just as the front door gave way with a deafening crash. The sound of the door breaking open was the final straw, plunging her into a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Chapter 3. The Basement Dweller. Mark was home alone, his family away on a week-long vacation. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every creak and groan. He relished the solitude, enjoying the peace and quiet of the empty house. It was a rare opportunity to unwind and catch up on his reading. That is, until he started hearing noises coming from the basement. At first, he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. It began subtly, a soft scratching sound that seemed to drift up through the floorboards. It was almost as if something was trying to claw its way out. Mark dismissed it at first, attributing it to the old pipes, or perhaps a stray animal that had found its way in. He tried to ignore it, convincing himself it was nothing, but the noises persisted, growing louder and more frequent with each passing day. It was as if whatever was down there was becoming more desperate. One evening, as Mark sat reading in the living room, a loud thump echoed from downstairs. It was so sudden and forceful that it made him jump. It was followed by a series of heavy thuds, as if something large was moving around in the darkness. The sound was unmistakable and sent chills down his spine. Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of unease, compelled Mark to investigate. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the cold metal. The weight of it was oddly comforting. Taking a deep breath, he slowly descended the basement stairs, each step creaking ominously in the silence. The air grew colder with each step. The air grew thick and heavy as he reached the bottom, a musty odor assaulting his nostrils. It was a smell of decay and neglect. Mark swept the flashlight beam across the cluttered basement, his heart pounding in his chest. The light revealed cobwebs and dust-covered furniture. Shadows danced in the periphery of the light, playing tricks on his mind. He felt as though he was being watched. He could have sworn he saw something move in the far corner, a fleeting glimpse of something large and dark. His breath caught in his throat. "Hello?" Mark called out, his voice echoing hollowly in the confined space and silence. The only response was the echo of his own voice. He took a tentative step forward, his flashlight beam illuminating a wall of old cardboard boxes. They were stacked haphazardly, as if someone had been searching through them. As he neared the boxes, the scratching sound returned, louder and more insistent than before. It was coming from behind the boxes. Mark slowly reached out, his hand shaking, and pulled down one of the boxes. The sound grew louder, almost frantic. It was filled with old newspapers, yellowed and brittle with age. They crumbled at his touch, releasing a cloud of dust. As he sifted through them, a small leather-bound journal slipped out and fell to the floor with a thud. It looked ancient, its cover worn and cracked. Mark bent down to pick it up, his fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. The sensation sent a shiver down his spine. He froze, his blood turning to ice. The realization of what he was touching dawned on him slowly. Protruding from beneath the pile of newspapers was a human hand, its pale, lifeless fingers curled into a grotesque claw. The sight was horrifying. Mark stumbled back, dropping the journal and flashlight in his haste to escape. His mind raced, trying to process what he had just seen. He scrambled up the basement stairs, his heart pounding in his ears. Each step felt like an eternity. As he fumbled for the light switch, he could have sworn he heard a low, guttural growl coming from the darkness below. It was a sound that would haunt him. He didn't waste any time calling the police. His hands shook as he dialed, his voice barely steady enough to explain the situation. When they arrived, they discovered the skeletal remains of a man hidden beneath the floorboards. The sight confirmed Mark's worst fears. The basement, it seemed, held a dark and sinister secret, one that had remained hidden for years. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Mark never forgot the terror he felt that night, the chilling realization that he had been living above a grave. It was a memory that would stay with him forever. 3 homes, once havens of comfort and security, transformed into prisons of fear. 3 stories that remind us that even within the walls we build, darkness can lurk. The next time you find yourself home alone, listen closely to the sounds around you. Pay attention to the shadows that stretch and shift. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones we invent in our minds, but the ones that find us in the dark. Sleep tight, because you never know what might be waiting for you when the lights go out.